And so you go from, that's Einstein's concept. Keep everything as simple as possible and no simpler. And I could prove A, and I could prove B, and I could prove C. And by getting them to focus on that this is all I need, all those defenses that they spent all that time, incidentally, I did a motion in limine on all this testing they wanted to do. So all that equipment, at the end of every day, we had a rehearing on the motion in limine that they could use that testing equipment and do all these splendid tests in front of the jury and demonstrations in front of the jury. So all that equipment sat out there for the whole trial and never used. So, but keep everything, when you have the burden of proof, I said, here it is, A, B, C. They said, no, it's this and this and this and this and this, and they had no coherent defense because they tried to defend on everything. The defense was simple. Here's the contract. There's nothing in this contract that requires us to use due diligence. That's the simple defense. And if we prove that defense, A, B, C doesn't matter. And they were right, but they never argued that. So think simplicity. Opening statements set out a simple pathway to victory. And don't overload, don't over-try your case. Keep it simple. Liking the lawyers. Seriously seek similarities. That means people like people who are like ourselves. You go to a bar and you meet, you're introduced to somebody and you sit down and you talk for a while and you have a beer or whatever, and then you leave and say, you know, I really like that guy. We had a lot in common. We had a lot in common. People like people who are like themselves. So you seek the similarities between your jurors and your expert witness, your jurors and yourself, your jurors. We take our jury voir dire. I mean, we take the paperwork that we get from them where they fill out, and this is where the questionnaire is so incredibly crucial. And you have things like their hobbies and all these sort of things listed that don't seem to mean anything. But you couch, I had a case in which there was a guy who was a master sergeant in the Army, retired, 30-year master sergeant. And he hadn't cracked a smile since 3rd grade. And the guy was just tough as nails. And I knew, A, he was going to be the foreman, and B, the rest of them were going to go however he went because they'd be afraid not to. So I looked at him. We look every night. We refresh our recollection every night. This is important because things the first time you read them don't mean that much. But you go back and read them again. You read their questionnaires or you read their information every night, and something that happened today made what you see on here important. So this guy, the thing that he had written on his questionnaire, and so I had asked him about it to give him an opportunity to brag. I said, I understand your, tell us what was your proudest moment? And he said, when my daughter was born. I said, I think we can all share that. But didn't you have a pretty proud moment in bowling? He said, I certainly did. I bowled 300 in a competition, and my 300 was 2 points over what we needed to win everything. And he was so proud, and he liked me. Why? Because I gave him the opportunity to talk about the proudest thing he had, okay, his proudest accomplishment. So then, when we get down to arguing the case, it's a paraplegia case. If we get down to arguing the case, you come back, this is where you circle back around in closing and you pick these things up. So we come back in closing, and I said, you know, for us, it is so simple to get up in the morning and go in the kitchen and make a cup of coffee. But let's talk about what Floyd has to do to make a cup of coffee. And then we go through the whole thing. He has to get out of bed, get himself into the wheelchair, roll it into the kitchen, reach up and go through the whole thing. He said, you know, what is so simple for us, for him, is like trying to pick up 7-10 split. Well, you know, I mean, it just snapped. I was talking his language. See, you're talking the language of the jurors. So small things like that, believe me, small things like that are important. You seek similarities. Now, you want to create empathy. Never, ever, ever go for sympathy. Sympathy is a mistake. Sympathy will play into the image that they have of trial lawyers. So you want to stay away from that, and you want to go for empathy. Empathy means I identify with you. I identify with your loss. I feel for you because I identify with the place you're in your life right now. Not I feel sorry for you, but I identify with your pain. Hello, a guy named Bill Clinton. What did he say to the African American community every single time he gave a speech in African character? I feel your pain. Every time. I mean, that was his catchphrase in African community. I feel, he's empathizing with them. And they responded nicely. So, but what you do want to project, don't project sympathy. Project courage. And you want to talk about, in opening, you want to talk about your plaintiff. But you want to talk about your plaintiff in terms, you're going to see a very courageous young man here. And we'll bring you this in the evidence. Courage is not sympathy, empathy not sympathy. And the question, the real argument is that this plaintiff is doing the best he can with what he has left after what they did to him. So to know what he's doing with what he has left, you go back to what he was before, what he is now, and what his life is going to be in the future. See, this young man right here, representing this youngster, 18 years old, forklift rollover. And that's not a posed picture. I went out and spent a day with him at his house, and we worked out together. And he's in working out in the gym. This is when this was taken, he was a 20-year-old kid, and he's paraplegic. And he said, you know, this kid was unstoppable. Paraplegic, paralyzed from the waist down. And he was unstoppable. This is the most courageous, this is probably my favorite plaintiff photo in 50 years of practice, because that tells the whole story. This is a kid, this is what courage is all about right here. Here's a young man doing the best he can. Not only that, he was always popping wheelies in his wheelchair. So he was always tearing up his wheelchair. And he said, you know what I'm going to do? He said, I need some money. You know what I want to do? I want you to get me a bank loan, because you cannot get a wheelchair repaired in this town. So I want to open a wheelchair repair shop. I said, okay. So he opened a wheelchair repair shop. Today, the kid is extremely successful in business. And don't even ask me about this. He's also married and got 3 kids. So he's totally unstoppable. So that's how you want to project him. Now, I want to talk to you about communicating with decision makers when we come back, but let me finish up the first part of this with these things that you want to know about. In the opening, there are psychological concepts I'll talk to you about. But in today's world, and especially in your world, the Gen Ys, the millennials, okay? I'm giving a speech tomorrow to a group of lawyers on communicating with the millennials. Because communicating with you is nowhere near what you would do to communicate with Ray and myself. Nowhere near it. Because, to give you an example, we were not raised the same way. When I was a kid, I was in a small town in North Georgia. During the summer, we'd get up, eat breakfast, and leave the house. Small town, 28,000 people. We'd all congregate somewhere. We might run and get a cousin somewhere, whoever's on the corner. And we would disappear for the day. And the rule was, when the street lights came on at night, we had to be home. That was the only rule. Can you imagine? There would be Amber Report out on you by 11 o'clock. So we made our own world. We made our own world. So when you're talking to me about someone who's independent and making his own world, is wholly different about talking to a Gen Xer or a millennial particularly, because you were raised in a world of absolute rules. Like I said, can you imagine you being missing? Can you imagine your kid being missing? Your 9-year-old kid leaves the house at 9 in the morning and you don't see him until till the lights come back on in the evening. In fact, we used to knock the street lights out so they wouldn't come back on. And but that's true. And we were all like that. It wasn't me. We were all like that. The whole neighborhood was like that. And we would go up in the mountains. And let me tell you what those mountains were. You remember Deliverance? I'm not kidding you. The Deliverance was filmed in the mountains that we used to play in. And they wouldn't let me come up there because I couldn't play a banjo. But the kid with the banjo is my third cousin. No, I'm serious. Those are the mountains that we played in. And nobody, and not one of us ever got hurt, ever got kidnapped, ever got anything. And we had our own little society at the age of 9 and 10. We used to go over in a highly, completely, totally, 100% segregated community, not city, but state, the whole South. We would go over to our swimming hole, and we would meet the African-American kids over there, and we would play games against each other. We'd play baseball against them. We'd play everything against them. We'd pair up, and sometimes we'd pair up and play mixed games against each other. We all swam together. And nobody cared. Nobody cared. And that was in 1947, when it was absolute. It was absolute. My father, who was a journalist, wrote a story for the newspaper that was entitled, "I Saw a Mob Lynch a Negro." And as a result of which the Ku Klux Klan came after him. So he sat in the house, he sat in our house, and my grandfather sat on the front porch with a shotgun across his knees. He said, "Come on." But I mean, that's what it was like. But we made our own rules. Now, apply that to yourselves. Apply that to the millennials. And here's the point of all this. The point is not that we had a hell of a lot more fun than you did growing up. The point is that you are totally accustomed to rules. You live by rules. You live by organization. You live by people telling you what to do. We played baseball. It's because we'd get the guy with the ball and the guy with the bat, and we'd go over in the field and we'd play. We didn't have any leagues for anything. We just had a bunch of kids that liked to play. And so we played. Now you got Pee Wee League and all these rules, and everybody gets a trophy. And I mean, it's a whole different world. So here's why this is important. In opening statement, you bring out the absolute, one of the first things you bring out is the rule the defendant broke. Now, you start with, here's the purpose, there's a rule, and you say it's a defective design of a vehicle or something. There's a rule that this has to be done in this way. Here's the purpose of the rule. It's so that it will protect you from this and this and this. The next thing is, so you got this rule, here's the purpose. This rule applies to this defendant. This defendant, as you see from the product itself, this defendant, this rule is designed to protect the consumer, people like this plaintiff. It's designed to protect the buyer who buys it and trusts that it's going to work. And what happened in this case, and the reason we're here, ladies and gentlemen, is because this defendant chose, important word, this defendant chose to ignore this rule. This product failed, as a result of which this man's in a wheelchair today. Now that's not argument. Those are all statement of facts. Now, you don't just say a rule. You're all visual. You're extremely visual. You're a very visual group. And so you put up the rule. In opening statement, you got the permission of the court to do it ahead of time and all that so you don't get interrupted by an objection. But you put the rule up there. When you're explaining what the purpose of it is, you put it up for him to look at. And then you start it with the purpose of it and his violation of it and so forth. Rules are absolutely crucial. Now, rules don't just mean rules written in books. It means rules, it means protocols, it means anything. It may be a group that has its own rules for doing things, but it's done by the entire industry.